The last time I saw my wife, she was on the evening news, being led away in handcuffs from the smoldering ruins of my company headquarters. The newscaster's voice was a grim drone, talking about corporate espionage and arson, but all I could see was Margaret's face, illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights. There was no fear in her eyes. No remorse. Just a cold, defiant glare that seemed to burn right through the television screen and into me. My phone had been ringing non-stop for hours, detectives, lawyers, reporters, and my business partner, Daniel, his voice a frantic, panicked mess. "She did this, Robert. Melissa told me everything. Margaret was selling our designs to a competitor. When you found out and threatened to expose her, she burned it all to the ground." I didn't answer any of them. I just sat there in the dark, the silence of my empty home a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding on the screen. I thought back to our last conversation, just yesterday morning. She had begged me for one more chance, tears streaming down her face, swearing she would change. She said she loved me, that she couldn't live without me. I had almost believed her. Now, watching her being pushed into the back of a police car, I felt a chilling clarity. The woman I married didn't exist anymore, if she ever had. In her place was a stranger, a woman capable of unimaginable betrayal. I calmly picked up my phone, not to call the police or my lawyers, but to book a one-way flight to a country where no one knew my name. As the news report ended with a close-up of the charred company logo, I whispered to the empty room, "Goodbye, Margaret." It was time to disappear. Robert and Margaret were once the couple everyone envied. They met in college, two ambitious souls drawn together by a shared dream of conquering the world. I was the quiet, methodical architect of our future, the one who spent nights sketching out business plans on napkins, while Margaret was the dazzling force of nature who could charm investors with a single smile. We were a perfect team. I built the engine, she was the polished, irresistible exterior. For 10 years, it worked. We founded Innovate Dynamics together, a tech firm that rose from a garage startup to a city landmark. Our lives were a whirlwind of product launches, industry awards, and magazine features. We had the penthouse, the European cars, and the circle of influential friends. From the outside, we had everything. But success has a way of eroding the foundations you build on. The more we gained, the more I felt Margaret slipping away. The shared dreams we once whispered about in our tiny apartment were replaced by her singular, insatiable hunger for more. More status, more wealth, more admiration. Our conversations shifted from we to I. It was my network, my reputation, my vision. I became a background character in the story she was writing for herself. She started spending more time with a new, flashier crowd, people who measured worth by the price tag on your watch. Her closest confidant became Melissa, a woman whose own multiple divorces had left her cynical and endlessly opportunistic. Melissa saw my quiet nature not as strength, but as a weakness for Margaret to exploit. "Robert is holding you back," I once overheard her telling Margaret over cocktails on our balcony. "He's the anchor when you should be the rocket." The real fissure in our relationship, however, had a name, Daniel. He was my business partner, the charismatic head of sales I had brought on 5 years ago to help us expand. He and Margaret were two sides of the same coin. They thrived in the spotlight, fed off public adoration, and shared a ruthless ambition that I was beginning to find unsettling. I started noticing the lingering glances, the private jokes they shared in meetings, the way they would both be on late-night work calls at the same time. When I tried to talk to Margaret about it, she would laugh it off, calling me paranoid and insecure. "You're so naive, Robert," she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is how the game is played. Daniel is a powerful ally. Are you really threatened by a little networking?" But it was more than networking. It was a slow, creeping betrayal that unfolded right before my eyes. She started criticizing me openly, first in private, then in front of our friends, and finally, in front of our employees. She mocked my simple tastes, my preference for a quiet night in over a loud gala. She called my careful, deliberate planning cowardice. To her, my integrity was a liability. The man she had once admired for his steady hand was now, in her words, dead weight. The breaking point came not with a bang, but with a quiet, devastating discovery. I was working late, preparing for a major investor presentation, when I stumbled upon a hidden folder on our company's server. It was protected by a password I shouldn't have known, but I guessed it on the third try, her mother's maiden name. Inside were files that made my blood run cold. Detailed schematics of our most secret, patented technology. Our entire research and development pipeline for the next 5 years. And emails. A long thread between Margaret, Daniel, and the CEO of our biggest competitor. They weren't just selling our designs, they were systematically gutting the company from the inside out, planning to bankrupt it and buy the remaining assets for pennies on the dollar with their new partners. They were going to destroy everything I had ever built. My world tilted on its axis. The woman I had shared my bed with for over a decade, the man I called my partner and friend, they were vultures circling what they thought was a carcass. The plan was meticulously laid out, set to trigger after the upcoming presentation failed, a failure they were engineering. The next morning, I confronted her. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I calmly laid a printout of one of the incriminating emails on the marble kitchen island between us. "Why, Margaret?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of cold fury. The argument that followed was the ugliest of our lives. She didn't deny it. Instead, she justified it. She called me a fool, a man content to sit on a goldmine while she was ready to cash in. "You don't have the guts to play in the big leagues, Robert," she screamed, her voice echoing in our sterile, oversized apartment. "I built this empire with my charm and my connections, and I will not let your pathetic sentimentality drag me down." I told her it was over. I would go to the board, to the police. I would expose her and Daniel. That's when the tears started. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. She fell to her knees, clinging to me, begging for forgiveness. She swore it was all Daniel's idea, that he had manipulated her, that she was scared and didn't know how to get out. She promised she would cut off all contact, that she would help me fix it. She said she loved me, that she had been a fool, and that I was the only thing that ever mattered. Against my better judgment, a small, wounded part of me wanted to believe her. I told her I needed time to think, that we would talk again in the morning. That was my mistake. It was the last time I spoke to her as my wife. The next evening, as I sat numbly in my study, the first fire alarm blared through the building. By the time I got to the office, it was already an inferno. She hadn't wanted to fix it. She had wanted to erase the evidence, and me along with it. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to my clothes as I sat in the sterile, impersonal environment of a hotel room hundreds of miles from home. The city I had left behind was a ghost, a place that held nothing for me now but the ashes of my life's work and the phantom of a marriage built on lies. Disappearing was easier than I thought. A new name, a cash-only existence, and the vast, anonymous expanse of the country were all the cover I needed. For the first few months, I was a ghost, haunted by the looping news clip of Margaret's arrest and Daniel's feigned, tearful interview where he painted himself as the victim of his manipulative lover. He claimed he knew nothing, that Margaret had acted alone, driven by greed. The world bought his performance. He and Melissa, who had conveniently provided an alibi for him, walked away unscathed, ready to pick over the bones of Innovate Dynamics. I, Robert, was legally dead. The authorities had found a body in the wreckage, burned beyond recognition, and a conveniently placed, forged suicide note in my office. Margaret's lawyers argued she was a woman pushed to the edge by a mentally unstable husband. It was a neat, tidy story. Margaret was sentenced to 10 years in prison, a lenient sentence for arson and corporate espionage, but the charge of murder didn't stick. Daniel, the grieving partner, was free. My new life began in a small, dusty town in the middle of nowhere, a place called Redemption. The irony was not lost on me. I took a job as a mechanic, the grease and grime a welcome penance. The complex schematics of engines were a comfort, a logical world where every problem had a solution, unlike the chaotic mess of human emotion I had fled. I called myself Ben. Ben was a simple man. He had no past, no family, just a quiet competence and a sadness in his eyes that the townspeople were polite enough to ignore. Years bled into one another. The fire of my anger cooled into a bed of cold, hard embers. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. I saved my money, and after 5 years, I bought the garage. I expanded it, my old business acumen finding a new, more grounded purpose. I built a reputation for being honest and fair, a man you could trust. The ghost of Robert, the tech millionaire, was buried deep. Ben, the small-town mechanic, was real. It was on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, 7 years after I had died, that my past walked through the garage door. I was underneath a vintage 1967 Mustang, my hands covered in grease, when I heard a voice that froze my blood. "Excuse me? I was told you were the best mechanic in town." I slid out from under the car and slowly got to my feet. It was Margaret. She looked different, yet achingly the same. The prison years had etched fine lines around her eyes and mouth, but they hadn't touched the defiant spark within them. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple dress, but she wore it with the same innate confidence. She was thinner, harder, but still undeniably Margaret. Her eyes widened, a storm of shock, disbelief, and something I couldn't name passing through them. "Robert," she whispered, the name hanging in the air like a ghost. You're alive." I didn't say a word. I just wiped my hands on a rag, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I don't understand," she stammered, taking a hesitant step forward. "They said you were dead." "The fire?" "A convenient story," I said, my voice raspy, unfamiliar even to me after years of disuse. The story came tumbling out of her. She had been released 2 years early for good behavior. She had nowhere to go. Her family had disowned her, her friends, including Melissa, had vanished. And Daniel had played her perfectly. He had visited her in prison once, a year into her sentence. He told her he had managed to salvage some of the company's assets and was starting a new firm. He promised that when she got out, a share would be waiting for her. It was all a lie. He had used her confession to absolve himself, taken every last dime, and built a new empire with their stolen technology. He was now a celebrated tech mogul, living the life they had planned together, while she was left with nothing. "He destroyed me, Robert," she said, tears finally breaking free and tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. "He took everything. Just like he took everything from you. I came looking for you. Not you, but your grave. I needed to. I don't know. Apologize. Say I was sorry." She had heard whispers in a nearby town about a reclusive mechanic named Ben who had appeared out of nowhere 7 years ago. A desperate, foolish hope had led her here. I listened, my face an unreadable mask. The woman crying in front of me was the same one who had stood coldly by as my world burned. The tears, the regret, was it real, or just another performance? "I was wrong," she choked out, her composure crumbling completely. "I was so wrong. I was blinded by greed, by him. But being in that place, with nothing but time to think, I realized what I had lost. It wasn't the money or the company. It was you. I destroyed the only good thing in my life." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I know I don't deserve it. I know you can never forgive me. But Daniel is having a gala tonight, 2 hours from here. Celebrating the 10-year anniversary of his company. Our company. He thinks we're both gone. He thinks he's safe. Help me, Robert. Help me take back what he stole from us. For you. For me. For justice." The conflict raged within me. The quiet peace of Ben's life was at war with the burning injustice Robert had suffered. Here was the woman who had betrayed me in the most profound way possible, asking for my help. She was offering the one thing I had denied myself for 7 years, a reckoning. Helping her meant stepping back into the world I had fled, becoming Robert again. It meant facing Daniel, the man who had smiled in my face while sticking a knife in my back. It meant trusting the woman who had lit the match. But watching her stand there, stripped of everything, a mirror of my own past self, a dangerous thought took root. Maybe this wasn't about forgiveness. Maybe this was about closure. The 2-hour drive to the city was a silent, suffocating ordeal. I sat behind the wheel of my old, reliable truck, a vehicle that knew only the dusty roads of redemption, now eating up the miles on a highway pointed like a dagger at the heart of my past. Beside me, Margaret was a statue carved from tension. The setting sun cast long shadows across the highway, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, indifferent backdrop to the storm brewing inside me. Every mile closer to the city, the carefully constructed walls of Ben crumbled, and the ghost of Robert clawed its way to the surface. My hands, usually steady from years of handling heavy tools, trembled slightly on the steering wheel. My mind was a battlefield. One part of me, the pragmatic mechanic Ben, was screaming in protest. It was a litany of warnings: this is insane. She is a liar. This is a trap. You have a life, a peaceful life. Turn the truck around. Go back to the familiar smell of grease and gasoline, to the quiet hum of your garage. Ben's life was safe. It was a small, predictable world I had built with my own 2 hands, a fortress against the chaos of emotion and betrayal. Going back meant surrendering that peace, willingly walking into the fire that had almost consumed me once before. But Robert was awake now, and he was roaring. For 7 years, I had suppressed him, burying the memories under layers of routine and physical labor. I had convinced myself that peace was the same as justice. But seeing Margaret, hearing Daniel's name, it was like a key turning in a lock I had forgotten existed. The feelings I had numbed came rushing back, not as a dull ache, but as sharp, stabbing pains. The humiliation of her betrayal. The fury at Daniel's smug, smiling face on magazine covers. The profound grief for the life, the love, the dream I had poured my soul into, only to see it turn to ash. It was a toxic cocktail of emotions, and it was intoxicating. The suspense was not about what Daniel would do, but about what I was becoming. Was I the man who wanted peace, or the man who demanded a reckoning? I glanced at Margaret. Her face was turned towards the window, watching the city lights begin to glitter on the horizon. Was her remorse real? The question echoed in the cavern of my mind. I replayed every moment of our past, her laughter, her ambition, her coldness, her lies, her tears. She was a puzzle I had never truly solved. Trusting her felt like willingly picking up a snake, hoping it wouldn't bite again. Yet, her plan, which she had laid out in a desperate, hurried whisper back at the garage, was brilliant in its simplicity. It didn't rely on my trust in her character, but on our shared knowledge of Daniel's weaknesses, his vanity and his greed. Are you okay? Her voice was soft, barely audible above the hum of the engine. I didn't look at her. No, I answered, the single word holding the weight of 7 years of unspoken pain. A heavy silence fell between us again. The suspense was a physical presence in the truck cab. It was in the space between our shoulders, in the shared, unvoiced memories. We were 2 ghosts driving towards a confrontation with a man who believed we were both buried. The plan was dangerous, bordering on suicidal. We had no resources, no allies. All we had was the element of surprise and the intimate knowledge of our enemy's playbook. The risk was absolute. If we failed, Daniel would not make the same mistake twice. He would ensure we disappeared permanently. As the gleaming skyscrapers of the city loomed larger, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The point of no return. The suspense was no longer a question of if we would do this, but what would be left of me when it was over. Could I face Daniel and walk away? Could I look at the empire he built on my ruins and not be consumed by the need to burn it all down myself? And what about Margaret? After this night, what would become of her? What would become of us? We were not allies, not friends, not lovers. We were 2 broken people bound by a shared trauma, hurtling towards a conclusion we couldn't predict. I pulled the truck off the highway, parking in the shadows of an overpass, the glittering tower where the gala was being held visible in the distance. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. I turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time. The setting sun caught the tears glistening on her eyelashes. "There's still time to turn back, Robert," she said, her voice shaking. "You have a life here. You don't have to do this." Her words were a final test. Was she offering me an escape, or testing my resolve? Looking into her eyes, I saw my own turmoil reflected back at me. The fear, the anger, the sliver of desperate hope. In that moment, the suspense crystallized into a single, terrifying certainty. Ben the mechanic couldn't do this. But Robert, the man who had everything stolen from him, had to. "He doesn't get to win, Margaret," I said, my voice low and hard, a voice I hadn't heard in 7 years. "Not again." I put the truck in gear and drove towards the city, towards the final act. The emotional struggle was over. The suspense was just beginning. The gala was a monument to Daniel's ego. Held on the top floor of his new corporate headquarters, the D-Tech Tower, it was a glittering affair overflowing with the city's elite. Getting in was the first hurdle. Margaret, using a fake ID and the remnants of her old charm, secured us catering uniforms from a rental service. We slipped in through the service entrance, 2 ghosts amidst the bustling staff. The plan was to get to Daniel's office, located on a private, keycard-accessible floor above the party. That's where Margaret was certain he kept his red ledger, a small, unassuming notebook where he paranoidly documented all his illicit dealings, a habit he'd had even in our early days. It was our only proof. We moved through the periphery of the party, our faces hidden in the shadows. The sight of it all was a physical blow. The company logo, a stylized version of the one I had designed, was everywhere. The people, many of whom had once called me a friend, laughed and drank, celebrating the success of a company built on a lie. I saw Melissa, draped in diamonds, laughing at something a politician said. She looked right past me, her eyes scanning the room for someone more important. To them, I was invisible, just part of the hired help. We reached the private elevator, the gateway to our goal. As expected, it required a high-level keycard. Now what? I whispered, the first snag in our fragile plan. Margaret didn't hesitate. She scanned the crowd, her eyes landing on a target. It was Daniel's executive assistant, a young, ambitious man I didn't recognize. Margaret approached him, a damsel in distress. "Excuse me," she said, her voice filled with a convincing panic. "I'm so sorry, I'm with the event planner, and my boss left her clutch in Mr. Daniel's office. He'll have my head if I don't get it. Is there any way you could let me up?" The assistant, flustered and eager to please, hesitated for only a moment before scanning his card. "Make it quick," he said. The elevator doors opened. We stepped inside, and as the doors closed, sealing us in the small, silent box, I looked at Margaret with a new, unsettling respect. The ease with which she lied was as brilliant as it was terrifying. Daniel's office was a shrine to himself. A massive portrait of him hung on one wall, and awards lined the shelves. While I stood guard, my heart pounding with every distant laugh from the party below, Margaret moved with a frantic purpose. She didn't go to his desk. Instead, she walked to the large, abstract painting behind it, the one I had seen in magazine photos. "He always loved hiding things in plain sight," she murmured, running her hands along the frame. With a soft click, a hidden panel swung open, revealing a small safe. "Of course," I breathed. The problem was, we didn't have the code. "It's my birthday," Margaret said, her voice hollow. "Our anniversary was too sentimental for him. But my birthday, it was the day he convinced me to betray you. He'd find that poetic." She keyed in the 6 digits. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single, red leather-bound notebook. We had it. But as I reached for it, my eyes caught something else in the safe. Tucked behind the ledger was a small, velvet jewelry box. My blood ran cold. I knew that box. I had given it to Margaret on our 5th anniversary. Inside had been a sapphire necklace, a family heirloom from my grandmother. On impulse, I picked it up and opened it. The necklace was gone. In its place was a single, folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It wasn't a note. It was a hospital report, dated 7 years ago, the week after the fire. It was a paternity test. It listed Daniel as the father and Margaret as the mother. The world tilted, the floor dropping out from beneath me. I looked from the paper to Margaret, who was staring at the red ledger with a triumphant gleam in her eyes. The pieces of the puzzle, the ones I had refused to see, slammed into place with brutal, devastating force. Her betrayal wasn't just about money. Her desperation to get out of prison, her story about Daniel abandoning her, her search for my grave. It was all a lie. A performance far more intricate and cruel than I could have ever imagined. She hadn't come to redemption for justice. She had come for this ledger. She needed leverage against Daniel, not for revenge, but for something else entirely. A child. Their child. "What is this, Margaret?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet as I held up the report. Her head snapped up. The triumphant look in her eyes vanished, replaced by the same flicker of pure fear I had seen the day I first confronted her. She saw the paper in my hand, and her face went white. "Robert. I can explain. Can you?" I took a step towards her, the red ledger forgotten. Was any of it real? The apology? The regret? "He took my child," she finally screamed, the words tearing from her throat in a raw, guttural cry. "Daniel used my prison sentence to declare me an unfit mother. He took our son and vanished. I haven't seen him in 7 years. Melissa is the only one who helps me, who gives me information. He told me he would let me see him if I could prove my worth, if I could bring him something of value. This ledger is the only thing he wants, the only thing that gives me any power over him." This was the second twist, the one that changed everything. She hadn't come for revenge against Daniel. She had come to bargain with him. She had used me, my pain, and my thirst for justice as a tool to get what she wanted. She had played me again, more masterfully than before. The conflict was no longer about us against him. It was about me, caught in the crossfire of two monsters who deserved each other. My quest for justice had been a lie, a means to an end for her. The sound of the elevator dinging broke the spell. We weren't alone anymore. I shoved the paternity test into my pocket, my mind racing. Margaret lunged for the red ledger, but I was faster. I snatched it from the safe just as the office doors swung open. It was Daniel. And behind him, holding a gun, was Melissa. Well, Daniel said, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. He looked from me to Margaret, his eyes glittering with amusement. A ghost and a convict. I have to say, I'm surprised. I didn't think you had it in you, Maggie. He glanced at Melissa. Good work. I knew she'd contact you. Melissa had set us up. She had been Daniel's spy all along. Margaret's desperate hope had been a carefully laid trap. Daniel's eyes landed on the red book in my hand. I'll take that, he said calmly. Give it to me, and I'll let you walk out of here. You can go back to your pathetic little garage, and she, he nodded at Margaret, can go back to prison for violating her parole. A clean slate. I looked at Margaret, whose face was a mask of utter despair and betrayal. I looked at Daniel, the architect of all my pain, standing there holding all the cards. And I looked at the red ledger in my hand. This was my only weapon. But it was also Margaret's only hope of seeing her child. My revenge, or her son? The choice was mine. The air in the office was thick with the silence of a standoff. Daniel's smug smile, Melissa's cold indifference, Margaret's shattered sobs, it was a tableau of betrayal. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of shock and fury, suddenly became icily calm. The choice wasn't just about revenge or a child I had never known existed. It was about ending the game, once and for all, on my own terms. Daniel thought he had won. He thought he knew me, the quiet, predictable Robert he had so easily cast aside. He was about to learn how much a man can change in 7 years of silence and grief. You want the ledger, Daniel? I said, my voice steady. I held the red book up. It's right here. But you're not going to get it. Not like this. Daniel chuckled, a low, arrogant sound. Oh, I think I am. Melissa, if he takes one more step, shoot him. Aim for the leg. I want him to feel this. Melissa raised the gun, her hand unwavering. She was no damsel, she was a predator, just like him. I ignored her. My focus was entirely on Daniel. You know, for a smart guy, you have a terrible memory, I began, taking a slow, deliberate step to the side, moving closer to the massive floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the glittering city. You forgot about the failsafe. The one I designed for Innovate Dynamics, the one you were so quick to dismantle in your new company. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Daniel's face. What are you talking about? There is no failsafe. Isn't there? I countered, my voice laced with confidence I didn't entirely feel. Project Nightingale. A dead man switch. A protocol that, if not deactivated by me every 24 hours, would dump the entire contents of our servers, every design, every financial record, every dirty little secret, onto a public server for the world to see. I built it after I first suspected a breach. When you rebuilt this company on my stolen data, you were so arrogant you probably copied the server architecture line for line. Did you ever do a deep-level audit, Daniel? Or were you too busy posing for magazine covers? It was a complete and utter bluff. Project Nightingale had been a theoretical concept, a proposal I had made that Margaret and Daniel had shot down as paranoid. But Daniel didn't know that. I could see the seed of doubt taking root, the frantic calculations running behind his eyes. His entire empire was built on stolen, proprietary data. If that data were to leak, he would be ruined, facing dozens of lawsuits and federal investigation. You're lying, he snarled, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Am I? I held up my phone. This is the kill switch. I stopped the protocol from here. But it's tied to my biometrics. If my heart stops, or if I don't check in within the next 10 minutes, everything goes public. Your entire house of cards comes tumbling down. I was banking on his paranoia, the same paranoia that made him keep a physical ledger of his crimes. The standoff shifted. The gun in Melissa's hand was no longer the primary threat. The data was. What do you want, Robert? Daniel asked, his voice now a low growl. This was the moment. The climax of a decade of lies. I looked at Margaret, who was staring at me, her face a mess of tears and disbelief. She had used me, yes, but she was also a victim of the man in front of me. Her pain was real, even if her methods were rotten. My revenge could not be just for me. It had to be for everything they had broken. First, I said, my voice ringing with authority. You're going to transfer 51% of DTEC's controlling shares into a trust. A trust for your son. The son you stole from his mother. Margaret gasped, her eyes locking onto mine. Daniel's face contorted with rage. You're insane. That's never going to happen. It is, I said calmly. Because if it doesn't, your company, your reputation, and your freedom will cease to exist in about 8 minutes. I glanced at my phone. Second, you will set up a visitation schedule. Margaret will have unsupervised access to her son, starting tomorrow. The details will be ironed out by lawyers, but the agreement is made now. And what about you? Daniel sneered. What's your price? Money? A piece of the company? My price, I said, walking slowly towards his desk, is that you confess. He laughed out loud. Confess to what? You have no proof of anything. I have this, I said, holding up the red ledger. And I have you. You're going to call the police, right now. You're going to confess to the arson at Innovate Dynamics. You're going to tell them how you and Melissa framed Margaret, how you coerced her, and how you orchestrated the entire thing to cover up your corporate espionage. And why would I do that? He spat. Because if you don't, I said, reaching his desk and picking up his heavy, glass nameplate, I'm going to destroy this ledger. Right here, right now. And then Project Nightingale will do the rest. You'll be ruined, but you'll be a free man, free to be torn apart by lawsuits for the rest of your life. But if you confess to the arson, you go to prison. A long, long time. However, the data leak will be contained. Your son's trust will still be worth billions. You'll be a monster, but you'll be a rich monster. And you will have provided for your son in a way you never have before. You get to choose your legacy, Daniel. A broke pariah, or a jailed genius whose son inherits an empire. What's it going to be? The choice was diabolical. I was offering him a way to protect the only thing his narcissistic ego might care about more than his freedom, his name and his lineage. Melissa, seeing her own immunity vanish, turned the gun towards Daniel. Don't you dare. You promised me. Daniel ignored her. He was staring at me, his mind racing. He knew I had him. The bluff was perfect because it played to his ego and his twisted sense of legacy. Fine, he finally bit out, the word tasting like poison. He reached for his phone. Not so fast, I said. Melissa first. I looked at her. Give me the gun. She hesitated, her eyes darting between me and Daniel. He'll kill me. He's going to prison, I said. You, on the other hand, can walk out of here. Or you can be an accessory to everything. Your choice. With a trembling hand, she placed the gun on the desk. I picked it up, the cold, heavy metal a final, terrible confirmation of how far I had come. Daniel made the call. He confessed everything, his voice a monotone of defeat. He implicated Melissa, detailing her role in the setup. As he spoke, I walked to the window. The city lights seemed to blur. When the call was done, and the distant sound of sirens began to grow, I turned back to them. Daniel looked broken. Melissa was pale with fury. And Margaret? Margaret was looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. It was awe, gratitude, and a deep, profound sorrow. I walked over to her and handed her the red ledger. This is your insurance, I said quietly. Make sure he honors the deal for your son. Then, I held out the paternity test report. And this is for you. So you remember the price of your choices. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the office, leaving the gun on the desk. I passed the terrified assistant by the elevator and didn't look back. I walked through the service corridors, stripped off the uniform, and melted back into the night. The sirens were getting closer. I didn't run. I walked calmly towards the nearest train station. The climax wasn't the confession. It was my realization. I didn't need to destroy Daniel. I just needed to take away his power. I didn't need to forgive Margaret. I just needed to be free of her. As I stepped onto the platform, I felt the weight of 7 years lift from my shoulders. Robert was finally at peace. And Ben could finally go home. The train ride back to redemption was a journey through a landscape of memory and shadow. The city's glittering skyline receded, its lights blurring into a distant, hazy glow until they were swallowed by the darkness. With each mile, the adrenaline of the confrontation faded, replaced by a profound and hollow quiet. I wasn't euphoric. I wasn't triumphant. I was simply empty. The great, gaping wound that had defined my existence for 7 years had been cauterized, the fire of my rage finally extinguished. What was left was the scar, and the man who had to learn to live with it. I didn't follow the news. I didn't need to. I had written the ending to that chapter, and I had no desire to read the reviews. I returned to my garage, to the familiar scent of oil and steel, and to the simple, honest work of my hands. The townsfolk of Redemption noticed a change in me. The deep-seated sadness in Ben's eyes had been replaced by a quiet, settled peace. The ghost of Robert was no longer haunting him. I had faced my past, not by running from it, but by dismantling it piece by piece. About a month later, a sleek, black car, the kind that didn't belong on the dusty streets of my town, pulled up to the garage. A man in a tailored suit got out. He wasn't a reporter or a detective. He was a lawyer. He handed me a thick envelope with no words, just a respectful nod, and then drove away. Inside was a single document and a cashier's check. The check was for $100 million. The document was a deed. Daniel, true to his word and likely compelled by the threat of the red ledger Margaret now held, had transferred the ownership of the D-Tech Tower to a holding company under my name. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. It was blood money, an attempt to buy my silence and, perhaps in his twisted mind, to balance the scales. I looked at the check, a sum of money that could buy anything in the world, and felt nothing. I looked at the deed to the building where my life had been both built and shattered. For a moment, I was tempted to burn them both, to reject the final remnants of that toxic world. But that would have been an emotional act, the act of the old Robert. The new Robert, the man forged in the quiet wisdom of redemption, saw an opportunity not for wealth, but for a different kind of justice. The ultimate revenge wasn't in Daniel's imprisonment or Margaret's broken freedom. It was in legacy. It was in taking the poisoned fruit of their ambition and turning it into something clean. I cashed the check. I took control of the building. But I didn't move back to the city. I hired a management firm with a single, clear directive. The D-Tech Tower was to be renamed the Phoenix Project. Its purpose was to be completely transformed. The top floors, once home to lavish executive suites and boardrooms, were converted into a state-of-the-art incubator for young tech startups, specifically for brilliant minds who lacked the capital to get started. It was a place where ideas could flourish without the predatory influence of vultures like Daniel. I established a foundation, funded by the building's revenue and the $100 million, to provide grants and mentorship. The only condition for entry into the Phoenix Project was a commitment to ethical practices, a clause I wrote myself. I was using Daniel's own monument to his greed to systematically create a generation of competitors who would make his ruthless brand of business obsolete. I was undoing his legacy with his own money. One person who applied for a grant was a young woman with a brilliant but underfunded idea for a data security protocol. Her name was Melissa. She had avoided prison but was left with nothing, her reputation in the elite circles she cherished now worthless. Her application was, on its merits, excellent. I approved it. My revenge was not to punish my enemies, but to own them. She would now spend her career building her future with my money, under my rules, forever living in the shadow of the man she had helped destroy. She would be a daily reminder that I had won. I never saw Margaret again. But about a year later, a letter arrived, postmarked from a small, quiet town a few states over. There was no return address. Her handwriting was neat, hesitant. Robert. There are no words to apologize for what I did. Sorry is a hollow sound. I know that now. I live in a small house. I have a job at a local library. My son, Adam, spends every other weekend with me. He is quiet and serious, and he has your eyes. He likes to build things. I see you in him every day. I know you didn't do what you did for me. You did it for yourself, to find peace. But in giving yourself peace, you gave me a chance I never deserved. A chance to be a mother. The red ledger is in a safe deposit box. It is my promise to my son that the world you are building is the one he will inherit, not the one Daniel and I tried to create. I will not ask for your forgiveness. I have no right. I just wanted you to know that a small part of the good you put into the world has found its way here. Thank you, Margaret. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It was the final piece of closure. She was living a quiet life of penance, and her son, the innocent product of so much pain, had a future. My revenge was complete. It wasn't a fiery, destructive act. It was a quiet, constructive one. I had taken their hate, their greed, and their betrayal, and I had transformed it into hope, innovation, and a second chance, not just for me, but for countless others. I walked out of my office and into the warm afternoon sun of redemption. A young kid from town was struggling with his bicycle, the chain having slipped off. I knelt, my hands, once capable of designing skyscrapers and complex software, expertly fixing the simple mechanism. The boy thanked me with a wide grin and rode off. I stood up, wiping the grease from my hands onto a rag. I was not a tech mogul. I was not a ghost. I was Ben, a mechanic in a small town. A man who had faced the abyss and had chosen not to become a monster, but to build something better from the ashes. And in that simple, profound truth, I found the only victory that ever truly mattered. I was finally, and completely, free.